Karen, are you doing slides?
I am.
Okay, just checking. Maybe you can send them to me tomorrow.
I would love to do that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, Jean's on.
All right, why isn't this working?
Says you're on custom live streaming.
Does it?
Yeah, it says it up in the top left-hand corner of my screen.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
I was going to say, hold on, I can check it, maybe.
Yeah, that's what always.
Here's Jillian, and here's Dan.
I see us 2 minutes behind ourselves.
And we're just waiting for.
There's always a delay on it, so.
Yeah.
As we learned it that one night.
It's just funny to say it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I'm easily amused. What can I say?
What is this doing? Oh, hold on.
Here it comes.
Okay.
I think we're just waiting for Debbie. Because Dan DeLee is here and Jillian and Rochelle.
Why is this not working? I'm going to be in the dark.
Tanya is on as well.
Okay. I think we should just get started.
We have Ann. Is Ann on too?
Oh, no, Ann's not on either.
Let's see, what time?
It's just 7:01 maybe.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, Debbie's live line is just coming on.
All right. All right, I'm going to turn on the recording as well. And then call the meeting to order. So this is the Board of Education meeting of November 4th, 2020. This meeting is being recorded, and we just ask that all participants mute themselves to prevent meeting interference, and you can unmute yourself using *6 on the phone. I'm also asking that everyone wait to be recognized by the chair before speaking so that people listening on the phone are able to identify who it is that's talking. And then finally, this meeting is being held remotely with access by phone or streaming as indicated on the agenda on the Board of Education district website. And so we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. So let me just pull up a flag. And we'll start with the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you. And that brings us to our statement of commitment to community, and I will read that this evening. So, as citizens of our community, we will conduct ourselves in accordance with Newtown's core character attributes as displayed in our character tree. We will be responsible for our actions and show respect for each other. We will interact peacefully, productively, and politely. We will be trustworthy and honest and show compassion toward others. Newtown's continued success is contingent upon our ability to persevere, to follow through with our commitments, and to stay focused on the greater good. And with that said, that'll bring us to our second item on the agenda, which is the consent agenda. So I will entertain a motion on that.
I move that the Board of Education approve the consent agenda, which includes the minutes of October 20, 2020, and the correspondence report.
Second.
All right, so Mr. D'Elia makes the motion, Mr. Kusan seconds the motion. Is there anything needing to be removed from that consent agenda? All right, sensing none. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right, that's unanimous. That brings us to our public participation. So during our first public participation, the board welcomes commentary on items that are on the agenda. After being recognized, if you could just please state your name and address for the record. And we ask that speakers be respectful and limit their comments to not more than 3 minutes. The Board of Ed does not discuss personnel items or student matters in public. And then during the second public participation, we welcome commentary on agenda items or any issues that the public would like the board to consider in the future. We don't engage in dialogue during either of the public comment periods, but if you need more information about something, you can email the board. Is there anybody on the phone who would like to address the board at this time? You can unmute yourself with a *6. All right, I'm not sensing any public participation, so we will close out public participation. And that'll bring us to our reports. So beginning with the chair report, I guess I want to start with the COVID, what's going on in the community with COVID. I know we had a respite from the high COVID rates and that we all relaxed a little bit over the summer months. I just want to make sure that we and everybody in the community are aware of the current rise in the rates here in Newtown, and especially in towns surrounding Newtown. Newtown has done a great job, but we interact with communities around us. And we need to make sure that as parents and community members that we're responding to the increase in the community, or our schools are going to have to respond by closing down activity very quickly. And the schools have really effective protocols in place, but they are subject to what's happening in the community. So I'm hoping that the community and parents take the time to think about this, scale back on eating inside restaurants, for example, with friends, or going into other people's homes. And also, I think it's time for us to voluntarily limit our own children's activities that go on outside of school. And finally, I think it's time once again for us to, as a board, meet virtually as a means whenever we can, as possible, similar to what the governor was asking of businesses, that if you can work remotely, you should now be working remotely. And I just think if school is going to be a priority for us, we need to keep our community levels of spread low. And so I think this is just something really important, and I'm hoping that everybody's thinking about that, because it's so important for us to be able to keep students in school. And on that note, we will be canceling the board retreat next week. Also, we need to be able to have the in-person conversations for that board self-evaluation. I think it's really important to do that in person. And we depend on Nick Caruso from CABE coming from another part of Connecticut to help us with that and facilitating those discussions. And I just don't think that at this time it's worth the risk benefit, or the risk benefit ratio is good for asking him to join us in person. So we'll put that off for another time. And I look forward to doing it, because I do think it's something very important that the board does. And so likewise, I'm also asking that we start doing our subcommittee meetings back to virtual meetings as much as possible. but also including those public measures in place so that people have access to our meetings. And then finally, and this is something we'll talk about a little bit more during this meeting on a later agenda item, but Sandy Rusas, the chair of the Board of Finance, has asked if our CIP Finance Facilities Subcommittee would be willing to meet with the Board of Finance and the Legislative Council Finance Subcommittee to discuss how to move forward on the education non-lapsing account, with the goal of doing so before budget season, which I think is going to be difficult given that our budget season starts in January, but we'll see if we can get that done. So based on discussions, I think there needs to be some further clarity from the town attorney for the other boards about who has the authority, but then also possibly a discussion about a joint policy. So as you know, from our discussion at our last meeting, the town attorney has said that the Legislative Council has the authority to put money into the non-lapsing account. So that's where that is all coming from. So that concludes my report. I don't know, are there any questions before we move on, or comments? Yes, Mr. D'Elia?
Our attorney agreed with the town attorney, correct? Did you say that?
Yeah, so
We'll talk, I guess we're going to talk about it later, so we'll just talk about it later.
Yeah, so that's true. Our board attorney does agree with the town attorney's decision, and we'll go through all his answers to questions that board members had at our last meeting on the agenda item that we have later in the meeting.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? All right, sensing none, we'll move on to the superintendent's report. Dr. Rodrigue.
Thank you, Dr. Koo. Well, I wanted to start this evening. We had a positive staff development day on election day, and anecdotal feedback from staff for both the keynote speaker, Dr. Derek A., and anti-racism workshops through the Connecticut Center for School Change. I think were well received. Some called all of it very powerful, but we are sending a brief survey, hopefully tomorrow or early Friday, so that our staff can share what they liked about the day and what they would like to see as next steps moving forward in the area of diversity and equity. So that was quite positive. Very happy we put that together, and it'll be interesting how we move forward. And I did talk with my administrative team, and I think the survey will be very well received by the staff, so they can give their honest feedback in looking at how we're going to take our next steps. Our P committee met last week in subcommittees. Truly what I call the messy part of the process and the work getting started. Our groups worked on budget and communication and branding, school community partnerships, and of course, the new subgroup, which is diversity and equity. We do have another meeting next week, and we will be again breaking into groups to get the year's basic, as I call them, big bucket goals off the ground. And I will be certainly sharing updates as we start that work this year. Our administrative team began talking about snow days and remote learning. We will be working on a plan. I think I put that in my communication to staff and parents. As we look at, as you know, there was a flexibility given by the state, and we want to look at how we're going to include typical snow days as we have in the past, and looking at some that may be remote as long as all of those right conditions are in place. For example, whether the power is on or students have their devices at home. There's so much to think about, childcare for some of our teachers. And so we most likely will look at implementing this once we have hit a certain number of snow days. We don't know what that potential threshold might be. We're thinking of a number. But again, all of those conditions have to be right for us to use any snow days as remote days and count them, so that we don't, again, go well into the end of June for the calendar year. But as we just started talking about it, we will have a plan put forward and we'll share the details with you once we lay that out ourselves. The high school, the district, and the town, as well as the Newtown American Legion, are working together to put a safe Veterans Day program together, which will be held outside at the Horse Guard property. We will invite some students to play, and we are putting together a video. And I know a box lunch will be created by our culinary at the high school. And of course, that will be held on Veterans Day. I don't think anything's changed on that at this point, right, Dr. Longabuco? Okay, good. You received the updated staffing report. As I normally go through that with you, we had no resignations and no retirements this month. We did have 1 grade, 1 teacher hired at Hedda Meadow. At this point, we have no open positions, although I will be speaking to you later on this evening about some possible staffing needs. We did hire 16 new employees during the month of October. And as I've been presenting sort of the ratio, the diversity ratio, it's at 12.5% of those hired. And that means those employees who identified as non-white who were hired in the month of October. So again, you'll see when you look at the staffing report, there's even a breakdown that Suzanne DeRamo is now putting on the report, which I think is helpful. And that's all I have this evening. Any questions? Okay.
Sensing no questions. Okay. Let's see, you get an enrollment report as well? Can you hear me?
Not sure. Is the sound coming through? No.
Michelle, you're muted.
Says my speaker's not working.
You're coming through now, Michelle.
Yes.
Okay. I'm getting the message it's not working, but if you can hear me, that's good. All right. I was wondering about the enrollment report, Dr. Rodriguez, that you sent to us, I think. Am I right? Or was that, am I thinking of something different?
Yes, so I did send the enrollment report, and I know there was one suggestion. Right now you can see that we have 4,085 total K through 12. And I did have one suggestion by Mrs. Zukowski, and it makes sense on the line that calls out the total K through 12 also includes the pre-K and the community partnership. And so we could change that line to read total enrollment. So it really encompasses more than just K-12. But if you have any questions with the certified, it is certified now as of October 30th. This is the enrollment report. So pretty much in line with what we thought. Again, as you know, we do have some students that were pulled out for the year due to COVID. Other than that, that's the main impact on enrollment.
So I was curious about the students who have been pulled out, and I assume the students who are pulled out and they're not distance learning, they're homeschooling or having some other means of education.
Yes, I'm not referring to those who are in, say, cohort D. I'm referring to those who were disenrolled for a year.
So I was wondering about, and I know we didn't address this on the assumptions and priorities for the budget that the Board of Ed approved recently, but is that something that we should consider? Will those students be coming back, and is that something that we should address? Is it a large enough number of students that needs consideration?
It's not a large enough number, but again, it does have some impact. Obviously, every student has an impact on enrollment. And we don't know where things are, so I think it's early to predict anything as to, obviously where the virus is later on in the year, and how confident parents feel to send their students back, those who have pulled them out. But again, if it is, if you're talking about the assumptions with respect to the budget, it might be something to entertain.
Okay. Especially as we, I mean, that goes in the budget book, and we present that to the other boards. It might be a good thing to include, just to make everybody aware that that's.
Well, and I think it's a good point, Dr. Koo, because there is uncertainty, and I think as we present the budget, that will come across certainly loud and clear, and I think it's something important.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe a future agenda. Okay. Were there any other questions or comments? All right, so we'll move on to committee reports. We would like to go. Mr. Voros?
Yes, curriculum and instruction met, and tonight you'll be hearing from the math department and Kim Longobuco on the Algebra 1 Foundation 2 and 3, which will provide support for students who enter high school without the necessary prerequisite skills to complete the algebra graduation requirements. It's important to note that these courses are all co-taught by a general ed and special ed teacher. And that having been said, I will not steal the thunder from this team who will be presenting to you. I might add that the note-taking that you received is very extensive, so you should be very well prepared to listen to them. The assistant superintendent Uberti update dealt with KA Chromebook distribution. There are now 625 more devices that are being distributed at the middle school, and the middle school ones will be collected back, and these return devices will then be redistributed to students in kindergarten through grade 4, making the district one-on-one K-8, which is great, because that leads us to the other item on the agenda that we had, which was district-wide testing. It's Anne's hope that the NWEA is administered between November 2nd and November 20th. This obviously are delayed dates. This will also depend on the devices distribution being completed on time, and that a viable plan for testing remote learners can be developed. I forward you to the spring testing window, which is pushed ahead to March. And if the state mandated SBAC, Smarter Balanced Summative Assessment, is happening, that will occur between May 10th and May 28th. And the state is currently stating that a remote testing option for SBAC will not be available. So as the information becomes available to Anne, she will forward it to the Curriculum and Instruction Committee, and then we'll forward it to you. I'd like to thank both Donna and Anne for always preparing such wonderful, extensive minutes, and especially now since they're doing a dual role at Hawley and central office, so I thank them profusely for all the time devoted to this. And that concludes the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Voros. Are there any questions or comments? All right, we'll move on to policy, communications.
You're
You want to
cutting in and out a little bit, just to warn you.
Need to do what? Say that again?
I said you're cutting in and out a little bit.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, I just realized that I get to pull double duty today, don't I?
Yeah.
So I guess I'll start with policy committee because I happen to have that one right up in front of me. We met last Wednesday. We discussed the racial harassment policy 5145.42, which is up for a second read tonight. We discussed the concerns that had been concerns and proposed corrections that were brought to us ahead of time. And we did, there were several areas that were addressed. We discussed them all. Some changes we implemented, some we chose not to. So you'll see that in a little while when we get to that on the agenda. We then talked about a policy, face masks and coverings, which has a whole list of numbers. It's 4118.237, 4218.237, and 5141.8. This one's up for a first read tonight and is a policy that was brought to us by CABE as an important policy, an important and timely policy, so we wanted to get it. We spent a few meetings on it, but we knew that we needed to get it to the board for discussion. We also discussed policy 4112.6, which is personnel, it involves personnel records. And we had a short discussion about 4112.8, which is nepotism and husband-wife employment. That one we had to push off for a future meeting for further discussion. And that was it for policy this week.
Okay. Any questions? Nope. And communications, I know you met. Did you want to save that until the discussion later?
Well, I can give the report because we discussed the newsletter that we are bringing forward at this meeting for approval, our equity and diversity newsletter. We discussed the final draft of that, and there were some changes that I made before I sent it out to everyone Monday evening. We met Monday afternoon. And then we started to outline our next newsletter, which is on technology. This one's evolved a bit on us. It's now a three-prong approach to technology, how technology is taught to students through like coding classes, that kind of stuff, how it's become ingrained in just the general curriculum, how it's used by the teachers, and then how technology deployment happens throughout the district, how it's managed both under normal circumstances and under the newer COVID-19 circumstances that we find ourselves in. So we've outlined those. We created a list of the articles that we want to write, the people that we want to talk to, and we're starting the process of getting all that put together. We're aiming for bringing it to the board, hopefully the second meeting in January. And that's it for the communications.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from anyone? How come I can't get everybody on my screen? Okay. So were there any other committees or liaison activities? I'm wondering,
I
yeah, Mr. Delia?
believe Mrs. Zakowski attended a public building and site meeting.
Thank you so much, Dan. I'm a little thrown off with the um, election. So now they went through, I sent out my notes to the building and CIP finance, well, to Dan basically. And there were a couple, the thing which was interesting were a couple of things that happened at the end. And I remember one in particular. There was a discussion about what the decision points for the architectural design should be. And they talked about there being studies that if you go with the minimum requirement that students don't learn as well. So there is a question of making sure that there's enough airflow to go through so that the students can learn as well as they can learn. And it was well received by the Building and Sites Committee. They thought that indeed it should be the case that instead of going for the bare minimum that would meet the requirements of what's considered a safe space, that they should really look into going for the amount that would provide optimal learning as well. And I thought that was a very interesting point they brought up. There was one other point which I don't remember, but we can talk about it at our next meeting.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to comment.
Yeah, Mr. Delia.
I didn't get, Mrs. Zakowski told me about this meeting, but I did not get invited to this meeting, and they were talking about the Hawley project. And I was wondering if you could reach out to their chair. And I mean, we're not being invited to these meetings, and you know, Mrs. Zakowski was kind enough to remind me, but I had a lot going on, and I just think that we should be really an integral part of these meetings if they're talking about the Hawley project.
Yeah, I agree.
Would you mind doing that for us, please?
Yeah, and I think I had done that previously, right? But I'll do it again. And
yeah, I'm to the point where I just look at all the meetings happening, for the week to start, just to make sure that there's not odd meetings coming up.
okay. Yeah, I think that's important. I mean, that you are a part of that team. You were appointed to that team, and it was requested that we have Board of Ed members represent the board as part of that. So I think that is important. So I appreciate your keeping track of when the meetings are and going, but it is important that if there's anything, there may be things going on beyond the meetings in addition to, just regular public building and site agendas. So I'll reach out again.
Thank you. And thank you, Mrs. Zakowski, for your notes and for going to that meeting. I appreciate it.
It was my pleasure, and I'm sorry they were in such raw form, but there were a lot of other things I was writing at the time.
All right, thank you. And any other reports or liaison activities? Right.
Michelle, I'm not hearing you very well.
I think she's asking the students to make their reports now.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So everything's been going pretty smoothly, and there's not too much change as far as the in-school environment. Classes are going fairly well, and students are they're already used to the new system. Of course, there were some who were disappointed because they were looking forward to seeing all their friends in school, but they mostly agree with the decision, especially given the rising number of COVID cases. Clubs are also going well. Even on Google Meets, they're still able to have very productive meetings. Sanitation is also a high priority, and kids are still cleaning their desks after every class. As for seniors, it's getting very busy right now. The first set of early action deadlines were actually this past weekend, and I know everyone's working really hard to get everything in. The next deadlines are coming soon in the next couple of weeks, and hopefully everyone will be well prepared.
Yes, I can attest to that. A lot of November 15th deadlines coming up. So good evening, members and Superintendent Dr. Rodriguez. I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the recent dedication of the Unified Lounge at the high school. So I've known Cam Powers for many years. She's a friend and has been a teammate in basketball, softball, and field hockey. And she's never let anything hold her back, and using her wish from the Make-A-Wish Foundation to highlight inclusiveness is another example of the role model she is. I haven't gotten to see the room yet, but I know it's where the math and science center used to be, so I'm looking forward to it and congratulating her on that. So fall sports are coming to a close. Most teams are ending their regular season games this week, and SWCs will start next week. I had my last game tonight, actually, and we won 8-1. The SWCs are going to look a little different this year than in the past, but regardless, I'm very happy we're still able to have them. I'm not sure about all of the sports, but at least for like field hockey and soccer, I know there'll be a North SWC winner and a South SWC winner. We're the North, and there'll be 3 rounds of games before the 2 winners are determined. So since fall sports are coming to an end, that means winter sports are right around the corner. And the tryout date is set for November 21st. And any students who are interested should look now as they're having like meetings, and you can register on Family ID. So due to COVID, we are unfortunately not able to have homecoming this year. However, that can't stop us from showing a little NHS pride with Spirit Week. So we're going to have Spirit Week at the high school next week, and the themes have not been announced yet, but if students plan to participate, which I personally think everyone should because Spirit Week is a lot of fun, they should pay close attention to announcements or the Twitter page when the themes get announced. The National Honor Society released decisions for this year's applicants. They accepted 112 new members this year, but they haven't made a decision about induction ceremonies yet, and I think the juniors were told to wait until November 15th for another word on that. The election has been a popular topic of conversation at school this week. I was just about, unfortunately, 6 months away from being able to vote, but I gotta wait another 4 years now. However, I do know some students at school who are fortunate enough to turn 18 just in time for the presidential election. Regardless of if you were able to vote or not, the journalism program and the Hawkeye school newspaper put a mock election out on their website. So any student can go and click one question on Google form and submit it, and they will post the results in the fall newsletter. So it'll be interesting to see how the school's results compare with the real results. And another way students got involved was volunteering at the polls for community service hours. So I know a couple of students who did this, and I personally think it's great to see kids at like a young age getting involved in different ways since we can't vote yet. And that concludes my report.
All right, thank you. Do we have any questions or comments from board members? Even at this point,
I have a question for Miss Clore. Miss Clore, how was it playing? How did it feel playing games with a limited or no audience? Did it feel the same on the field? How was it received by the kids, in your opinion?
In my opinion, I would say, I was fine with it. Like, I think it was like we still got to have 2 people, which I think was like great, better than none. And like my parents still got to come. I guess it was a little sad that like no students could come to watch, but I think it's like still good given the circumstances. Like, it's very like acceptable, I'd say, I guess.
May I continue?
yes, please.
Is there anything that you think we could do to better promote or provide opportunities for viewing sporting events and these activities that are so restricted at this point? Is there anything you'd like to see or something that you could,
I know the Twitter page like posts the links to every game, but I guess like the best way would be announcements or like student promotion, like because like the NHS Athletics is doing the best goes with their Twitter page, but we have like an Instagram page, so I guess they could be better at posting the games and the links. But I don't know. That's a good question, actually.
Thank you.
I see Dr. Longabuco has something to add.
Mr. D'Elia, every game is live streamed, whether it's indoors or outdoors. So on the NFHS network, you can actually see every game that's happening with live Jay Edwards commentary for the full experience.
Oh, good old Jay Edwards' commentary. I know it well. That's why I was kind of trying to lead Miss Clore into, should we get more cameras there? Should we, would it be cool to have a bunch of different camera angles or make it like a whole, I don't know. I just thought it might be.
Know of a student who was trying to film the games with like a drone, and he was posting the links on his Instagram page, and all of his like shots turned out very cool. And he was like asking us if he wanted us to come to our games. So that's student promotion, which is pretty nice.
Yeah, I think that school spirit's critical right now, and I just thank you for your comments, and thank you, Dr. Longabuco, for letting me know about that as well.
Of course.
All right, any other questions or comments? All right. Thank you so much for letting us know what's going on in high school. You can just change it month by month, week by week. You can't hear me.
No.
All right, Mr. D'Elia, can you?
Now we can see crystal clear. It's weird. It comes in and out. Now it's crystal clear.
I wonder if, all right, if I sit closer, am I better? Maybe. It might be my connection, and if I just log off. Well, just go out and down. Yeah, I'm going out.
Try leaning back a little bit.
Yeah, you think if I lean back, does that work?
Let's try it.
So I'm too close to the computer, huh? All right. So wave me down again if you can't hear me, because what I'll do is I'll probably end up logging off and reassigning somebody to be the owner of the meeting, and then I'll come back on. And Mr. D'Elia, you can take over while I'm gone. All right, so thank you for the reports from the high school and all updating us on all that's going on. And now we will move on to our presentation from the high school. So we have Mr. Hall here and Dr. Longabuco, and did I see?
Joanna Kloss is also here. She's just here to support.
Okay. So this is our first read on the grade 10 Algebra Foundations 2 curriculum and grade 11 Algebra 1 Foundations 3 curriculum. So Mr. Hall, I'll turn it over to you.
Good evening, everyone. Again, I'm Gene Hall. I'm the math department chair. We'll be presenting 2 curriculums tonight, Algebra Foundations Part 2 and Part 3. Dr. Longabuco is going to be driving the PowerPoint, so she's digging that up right now. I can see.
I actually don't have the permissions to share my screen.
So
Dr. Koo, can you give me, I don't know if you could give that to me so I could share my screen?
Michelle, if you make her a co-host, it should allow her to share her screen.
That worked. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Yes.
All right.
And everybody can hear me okay. Okay, good. The reason I asked that is because during the Pledge of Allegiance, my computer went, and I was like, oh, this is really bad. Okay, so good evening, everyone. Again, I'm Gene Hall. We're just going to talk about these two curriculums right here. Foundations Part 2 and Part 3. I'm actually teaching Part 3 this year. So let's go over to the next slide there, Ms. Longo, Dr. Longo. So we're just going to be talking about algebra. Part 2 and Part 3 is just Algebra 1 split up over 2 years. Part 1, if you remember, I presented that last March, shortly before the quarantine. And Part 1 is pre-algebra, essentially Math 8, taught out of the high school. And we'll talk about the number of kids and what these kids are like in a minute. But Part 2 and Part 3 is Algebra 1 broken up into into 2 years. The curriculums were written during the summer of 2019. Just this recent past couple of months, it was reviewed by the district math committee, which gave us a fair amount of feedback on our work. And I think really because I think a lot of people are better at, or more comfortable, or more confident in their concept-based curriculum. So we got a lot of good feedback that we addressed, as well as the curriculum council. You know, they really dug into our curriculum again and gave us some new feedback that we hadn't considered. And then I just want to give a nice shout out to Ann Uberti. I'm on Team Uberti. Love working with her. You know, she's really, I think she really has a good vision for our K-12 math curriculum, not only just the high school. And particularly, we've had some deep conversations about this program that we have at the high school and this population of kids. So I just want to give a shout out to Ann, Team Ann. And then finally, my math department members. You know, to me, when I say math teachers and I say curriculum, those two don't go in the same sentence. I have a strong team standing behind me who really believe in working hard on curriculum and really want to make our curriculum reflective of what we teach and also to fit it into the concept-based curriculum. Of 14 members, 12 out of 14 have written curriculum. Obviously, in Foundations 2 and 3, it was only a smaller group, but really, I have a real strong team behind me who really enjoy working on curriculum and making it really reflective of what's going on in the classroom. Okay, so here's the pathway that we need to consider when we're talking about these courses. Again, Algebra 1 Foundations Part 1, that's essentially pre-algebra with a big long name. It morphed into pre-algebra after we taught the class a couple of years. That's traditionally for our freshman students. After they go out for Foundations Part 1, and we'll talk about the population and numbers in a minute, but the trajectory is to go to Foundations Part 2. But really our goal is to go to CPB Algebra 1. So again, Part 1 is really pre-algebra, and we want to get them back into our traditional Algebra 1, Algebra 2 cohort system. So we do whatever we can, or really our Part 1 teacher, Ms. Cavatero, does whatever she can to evaluate her students. And if she feels that they're capable, she says, okay, you've got the skills that you needed that for pre-algebra, and we're going to put you back over into the Algebra 1 grouping or cohort. But then if the students need some more support, they go over to Part 2. And the next one. So then the Part 2 students traditionally go to Part 3, but then sometimes go over again, Ms. Longobuco. Sometimes the CPB Algebra 1 students who need a little bit more reinforcement, CPB Algebra 1 students who need a little bit more reinforcement in their algebra skills, go back into, not back into, but we'll sometimes go into the Foundations program. I'm actually teaching Part 3 this year, so we have 2 students who came from Algebra 1 or back into our Foundations program, just so we can give them additional support on their algebra skills. Traditionally, our CPB Algebra 1 students go to Algebra 2, and then these students feed into geometry. Our Part 3 students, this is our 4th year of our Foundations program. So as you see, there's really only 3 years in our Foundations program. Of our students that were in Part 3 last year, I think 10 out of 12 are currently in geometry and are finding success. And all those students have met the graduation requirements, because right now it's currently only 3 credits. This is looking at numbers. So Foundations Part 2 and 3 didn't start in 2017 and 18. Foundations 1 started and there were 19 students in the program. And then in 18 and 19, so if you notice, I used the same color. So there were 19 students in Part 1, and then in 18-19, there were only 12 students. So again, Ms. Cavatero did the best that she could to evaluate these students and get them out of our Foundations program and put them back into CPV Algebra 1. So notice the Foundations grew a little bit last year to 26. But again, notice that 22 students in Foundations last year, or excuse me, 2 years ago, went down to 8. Again, I'm going to say this again and again, we're doing whatever we can to get them back into CPV Algebra. Again. And then so Foundations Part 1 is a little bit smaller this year. And notice the 26 students in Part 1 are now down to 13. Notice that Part 3 in green grew from 8 to 12. That's because there were 2 students who came from Algebra 1 who needed some more reinforcement, and then a couple of students who were new to the district. But again, really the important thing you want to look at is the Part 1 numbers and then how that compares to Part 2. And again, we're doing whatever we can to get them back into Algebra. Here, the team that worked on the Foundations Part 2 curriculum, they also worked on Part 3. Charlotte Cavatero, who teaches Part 1, Kirsten Racho, and Danielle Denez. Part 2 was first offered in 18 and 19, covers the first half of Algebra 1. Here's the big thing, it's co-taught with a math teacher and a special education teacher. It's been the same special education teacher for all 3 parts. So she sees those students across all 3 years. Some of the students require paraprofessional per their IEPs. And if you notice that Part 1 had some really large numbers, a couple of times we've had a math teacher go in there as their duty to support those students. So here's the content that we're talking about in Part 2. The first thing we're starting off with is graphing lines. So you're talking about slope. There's a real straightforward example of a slope and slope-intercept form. The slope is 3 and the y-intercept is 2. We're practicing that stuff right there. And then we're going the other way, as opposed to drawing lines. We're writing equations of lines and calculating the slope, given 2 points. The rise over run, real famous thing in algebra. Again, there's an example of the slope-intercept. Next, we look at inequalities. Inequalities is just essentially graphing a line and then shading the region that supports that inequality. So everything in blue is all the ordered pairs that satisfy that line right there. The boundary line just talks about if it's a solid line or if it's a dotted line, and that's based on the inequalities. Next, we look at graphing systems of equations. You can look at that first graph right there. It's just essentially, when do 2 lines meet? Sometimes 2 lines meet at a point. Sometimes they're the same line, which is infinite solutions of the same line. The last one is inconsistent, and that's just talking about 2 lines are parallel. And again, that's the graphical representation of looking at the solutions. Next, we do it algebraically, which is essentially the same thing, but doing it more analytically as opposed to graphically. And you can make the same conclusions. It's just done analytically as opposed to graphically. And then we do systems of inequalities, which is taking one of the topics we talked about a minute ago, and then graphing 2 of them at the same time, looking at the solution set. In this case, that would be like the purple kind of region over to the right. And then we talk about relations. Sorry, my screen is so dark. Relations, and that's really, to me, this is the most analytic that we're looking at in this program here, more kind of abstract. You're talking about relations, how a set of numbers, or excuse me, a set of ordered pairs are the x values related to the y values. Functions, which is talking about your input and output. Paired data is essentially ordered pairs. Continuous and discrete, that's just talking about a set of data. Is it a bunch of random points, or is it something that comes together and makes a curve? And domain and range, I mean, that's huge for algebra. What are the possible input values you can have, and what are the corresponding outputs? Domain would be x, and range would be y. And then function notation, which is even more abstract than the previous slide, which really is getting into the way that math is written and how you describe functions. That's a basic function of a line right there. where your input value is X and then your corresponding output is F. You can use any letter you want for your function, but typically F is used, or G or H. And again, we refer to domain and range by looking at the rule, determine what are the possible input and output values. Now we're on to part 3, which is essentially the second half of Algebra 1. We have the same team work on it. This is our second year running part 3. Again, I teach this class, and because I really believe in the program. Again, math teacher, special education teacher, paraprofessional as needed. And sometimes we have a math teacher in there as a duty if the class gets large or needs some additional. We first start off with exponential functions. In this case, we're talking about exponential expressions. And just talking about like x squared times x is x to the 4th, and other examples along those lines. We then look at that same idea of graphing exponential functions, which is exponential growth and decay. What happens? We've all thought about car loans and deposits in a bank, savings accounts. So that would be some examples of growth and decay. And then applications of that, again, compound interest is savings account or a loan. Growth and decay is just, things doubling over time, or half-life would be an example of decay. That's good examples you can use from science. And then here we get into like to me, like this is the real meat of algebra, working with polynomials, because you have the strong fundamentals of polynomials and the concepts therein will lead you to higher level math, particularly calculus and pre-calculus. And then this is the part where at the end of the year, the last fourth quarter, where you're getting into factoring. I'm sure some of you remember that. And, it has to do a lot to do with number sense and all the different algebraic and variable properties that we learned. And then finally, we're talking about quadratics, which is just graphing things that are on the second degree. And there's many different properties that you can talk about with quadratics, particularly the intercepts, the vertices, axis of symmetry, and extrema is just a big fancy word for the mins or maxes or vertices. And then solving quadratics, which is essentially just determining when the quadratics cross the x-axis. The huge implications, talking about finding intercepts, many different ways you can do it. This is just scratching the surface. Talking about the quadratic formula, graphing to find the x-intercept using technology, and then algebraic means, which would be by factoring and then setting. And I think that wraps up my presentation. So thanks a lot again for having me. Happy to be here. Love presenting stuff to you guys. Unfortunately, I get more excited or more energy when it's in person. But again, thank you for your time. Oh, shout out to Jill and Rachel, 2 great kids. I have them both.
Thank you, Mr. Hall.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Hall.
I just want to briefly add, Jean, excellent job. But this is a program that we truthfully believe in at the high school. 3 years ago, we saw some serious math deficits coming into our building, and that was how this program originated. And over the last 3 years, we've really been able to morph it into something that is truthfully working, and we're seeing the outcomes that we're looking for. Between using the same teacher, the same special education teacher in all 3 years, that's providing a really strong through line for our math students. And a different math teacher every year is allowing them to really focus on that one particular course that they are teaching. And as you could see from Jean's numbers, we really are reducing those students, and we're truthfully putting them back into a more traditional math class or math pathway, which is what we're looking to do. So this by no means, similar to when we spoke about Foundations Part 1, is not a track for a student that they cannot get out of. And the math team has really worked hard to kind of get on board with this in special education. And I think we're seeing such great success because everybody is on the same page and understanding. And what we're doing now is Tom Einhorn, Matt Correa, Ann, and Maureen Hall and myself are doing a pretty thorough look back all the way back through Reed School of math students' grades and how they got to this place in high school. So we took the attendance rosters of these foundations classes and we tracked them all the way back to 5th grade to see what math they took, what grades they got, and where were the support services that they were receiving. So we can really look back and see how the trajectory of the 4 years before they got to high school caused them to potentially be in need for a program like this.
That is so fantastic. So can everybody hear me now? I'm using my phone instead of the video. Okay. All right. So Mr. Hall, did you have something you wanted to add?
I just want, Kim, I think you can address this better. How many, I believe there's 2 special ed math courses currently?
There are, you mean unrelated to foundations? So there's one other math class, which is called Topics in Math, and that is for our lowest math learners. And part of the reason for the development of this foundations class is because that we didn't have anything between this foundational life skills type math class and our introductory CPB Algebra 1. And we were noticing that there was a whole bunch of students that were falling in that range, that they needed something different. And so that is sort of where the foundations part 1 led us. And then we grew every year when we saw that the need continued for a part 2 and a part 3.
All right. Thank you so much. I so appreciate your presenting the pathways of students and looking back at where they've been and what it is that leads them to this point, because I think that's so consistent with other courses and the pathways that we've set up with many of the math courses, and the flexibility in all of those pathways is key. I think we very much appreciate that, or I very much appreciate it. I think it's consistent with what we've been doing. So are there any, and I see a thumbs up on that. Are there any other questions or comments?
Michelle?
Yes, Mr. Voros.
Well, I have a comment. I would assume that when Kim and her cohorts have looked back at tracking the children before they get to 9th grade, that we are now working on how we can better prepare those children for when they enter the high school. So I guess that'll be something that we can address, you and I, at curriculum and instruction, so that we know how that's working and what's being done and what we can do to assist in that process. Thank you. That's it.
Sure, John, that's exactly what we're doing. And we're actually looking at how we can potentially change instruction prior to getting to the high school so that they have a similar model to what we're doing, and not as much potentially small group pullout services. So it's a look back at exactly what's happening at all the different levels, and then kind of a team effort of what we can tweak and adjust to get a better outcome.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So maybe what Mr. Voros is asking is, once you've gone through that process, if you could share that information with curriculum and instruction, or even the full board at some point, that would be great. Mr. Voros, did you have more to add to that?
No, I'm finished. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other? Yes, Ms. Lideline.
Hi, thank you. So I had a couple questions. First of all, when the students, if they return to the Algebra 1 course, the CPB Algebra 1 course, are they in a co-taught class at that point in time also, so they're supported?
Typically, yes. I would say almost always they go from this co-taught class to the CPB co-taught class.
Okay.
It is a different special education teacher and a different math teacher, but it is still a supported class. This class is actually almost all special education. Occasionally, there's a couple students who are not special education, but our co-taught classes are closer to that 50% mark.
Okay. May I ask another question?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, I just wondered if there was any tracking as to how these students do on, for instance, the SAT or the ACT. Are we looking at all about how they are prepared, especially with in comparison to their cohort?
Sure. We actually did a pretty in-depth PSAT look back. And what part of the reasons why we developed this was because we were realizing that our lower performing math students were performing extremely poorly on the PSAT. And part of that was to no fault of theirs. They were not getting the knowledge that they needed to prior to taking the test. So actually in the same year that we reversed the geometry and algebra 2 course, we put this foundations course into place so that those students could get more of the knowledge that they need to be successful on the PSAT.
Okay. And then I had one more question.
Yeah, go ahead.
It just went right out of my head. Is there any correlation between this class and the science courses? Does this impact what science courses these students are able to take, or at what level they're able to take the science courses?
I don't know that there's a direct correlation in that. We do not have a foundations type science track, for lack of a better term. So those students are in co-taught science classes, and typically when we do this special ed master schedule, we make sure that they're all aligned in different periods so that if a student does need 4 co-taught classes, they're able to get all 4 of the ones that are on grade level for them.
Okay, so they have access to different science courses that, if, for instance, if there's an area that they're particularly interested in, they have access to those classes.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Okay. Are there any other questions from board members, high school board members, anyone? All right, so thank you so much for sharing the curriculum with us. That's good to have that alternative pathway available. And I would encourage any board members who have questions or comments before our next meeting that you make sure you get those to me or Ms. Uberti before our next meeting, so that those, or actually it would be Mr. Voros, get the questions to Mr. Voros. And then we'll make sure that those questions get answered. All right. Thank you so much for sticking with us tonight, and feel free to hang in there and listen to the rest of our fun-filled evening. Otherwise,
Thank you
have a
very
good
much.
night.
Have a good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, so that brings us to our old business, which starts off with our COVID-19 update. Dr. Rodriguez, do you have updates for us?
Yes, so as you know, we had multiple COVID cases in our schools recently, and I sent a communication out to the community, the parents, the staff. And of course, this required us to quarantine students and some adults as well. This is not unexpected again, and you alluded to that in your report, Dr. Koo, while we have simply put a pause on bringing any additional students in the upper grades back for now. We also feel very strongly that the elementary schools are doing okay and where they should be, at least at this point in time in school, as an all-in. Again, while there's some spread in the community, we're not seeing it in that same way in the schools. And I know that was again brought up by Donna Colbert, and I'm part of their emergency operations committee at the town level. And we just met this morning. Again, we're hearing that same confidence level, at least in the schools. That doesn't mean it doesn't impact, as you know, with Holly, It did impact some adults, including the principal and some staff. Again, thanks to Mrs. Uberti and Mrs. Norling for stepping in. We're trying again, when we don't have to close a school, we're not going to. And, we want the students in. We feel very strongly about that for a lot of reasons. But again, safety is our priority. So there may come a time when this is just not feasible. It has not happened yet. So most of what we're seeing, the contacts are family cases, again, in the community. I am in constant contact and consult with Donna Colbert, our health director, and we continue to monitor the situation, not only across our schools, but in the town and in Fairfield County, and of course, across the state of Connecticut. I am posting the weekly reports now we receive based on state data and put together for us through EdAdvance. And those reports, you can find that on the website. It outlines the number of cases over a 14-day rolling average. Right now, the latest one, which just came this week, we're looking at 12 cases currently. And again, this does not represent in the schools, but across the community. And we are seeing the other condition, which is where the trend is, which is upticking. And again, this just simply helps inform our decision about what learning mode to be in, whether it's full in participation, hybrid, or remote. Again, we're keeping our younger students where they are at this time. They're easier to manage. The cohorting is much easier, and they can socially distance. And again, as I've said again and again, it's a little bit more complex at the upper grade levels. Again, we want all students back eventually, but we are ready to make a swift change if we have to. And again, safety being our top priority, what's in the best interest of our students and our staff. So that's all I have. Where again, I will receive another report as I do. I sit with my team. I look at it through with Donna Colbert and make any decisions that have to be made.
Thank you, Dr. Rodriguez. Are there any questions? Comments? I have a question about, I know that as the number of cases goes up, I know the contact tracing gets more and more, there's more of it to do. And so it takes more people to do that. And I'm just wondering if, Newtown is still not at the levels that some of the towns in Fairfield County are, but right. Do we have the staffing to help with the contact tracing, and is that a consideration?
Well, we do right now. I know Donna is, I don't want to speak for our health director. I know she's inundated at times, but we do have and our supervising nurse for the district who is definitely helping. And certainly the administrators get involved. It is the nurses, though. It really, we're putting a lot of responsibility on our supervising nurse and the other nurses to help out. But Donna does, as our health director, make the significant calls that need to be made. Again, you can understand why she asks the right questions, and it is coming from her level of authority as the health director. And they do, often parents have a lot of questions. And again, the same is true if a nurse calls home as opposed to a principal. So we're making sure the right people are making those calls. But, we've been able to do it, I have to say, in being very efficient about the contact tracing. And I think that is kudos to the parents and the community who are providing that information readily to either the health director or to our administrators. And that's really, really helpful. And again, while it looks like we've put maybe, one case could put a group of students on quarantine or some adults, But because we're getting that information readily from the family, that's very helpful. You know, we've had information from businesses in town to help us. And families have been extremely cooperative. So.
Which is, I mean, largely a part of, I think, you know, that Newtown is successfully, I mean, the cases are going up, but I think that Newtown has done relatively well. And so kudos to everybody who's doing that contact tracing and making sure, and the families who are cooperating and everybody who's doing what they should be doing.
We're hoping, I just want to mention very briefly, we're hoping to get a letter out pre-holidays, just some mentions to reminders, gentle reminders to parents about travel and when you're with your families and college kids coming home. We just want to make sure that people are continue to be vigilant. I think that, again, is a very important factor when it comes to the spread of the virus. And we want to make sure we keep our students in school and keep our staff and students safe and healthy.
All right. Any other questions? Now we'll move on to very different topic, our second read and possible action on grade 5 language arts curriculum. So I'll entertain a motion on that.
I move that the Board of Education approve the grade 5 language arts curriculum.
Second.
Okay, so Mr. D'Elia makes the motion, Mr. Crisson seconds the motion. I don't think there were any questions or comments that came in on the curriculum. Is there any further comment now? All right, sensing none, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None, so that passes unanimously. And that'll bring us to the Diversity Compliance Coordinator. So Dr. Rodriguez, do you want to tell us a little more about this?
Yes, so you all should have received the draft of the Diversity Compliance Coordinator. And I did get one, Mrs. Zukowski gave one, I thought, really good piece of feedback, something that we could add. So you did, hopefully you got a chance to look through it. What I tried to do is outline the basic job responsibility, the role of this particular coordinator individual in our schools. And I think I said the last time we met that this is someone that I think most critically we want to be able to have a relationship with families, to work with students, but also to work with staff. There are key, and I think it was brought up by Mr. D'Elia, you know, what is that? How is that going to work with the staff that are, you know, those staff members who do already work with students and who do already work with families. But again, I see this person as exactly that, a liaison, as we have other positions like that in the district currently. And so I mapped out some of the essential duties and responsibilities. And I think there were two questions that I had from board members. One was sort of the authority piece of this position. There's a lot of assisting and working with and collaboration, but that is exactly how we want this position to shape. It is not, I do not see this role as administrative in nature, nor do I see it as a disciplinarian at all. That is not the purpose of this individual. However, I do see working with our assistant superintendent. I see working with our the committees across the district, very important. Supporting the human resources director, working in tandem with the human resources director in recruitment efforts. I see a critical role, especially after yesterday. It became very clear that that individual could help in next steps in moving a lot of the diversity and equity professional development forward, not just for staff, but I see parents and families wanting some of that as well. So it really is supporting school and central office leaders, even in responding to federal and state agencies when there are complaints that go beyond our district. And we've had those plenty of times. And again, not just around race, whether it's special education, whether it's bullying. Remember, this is a diversity liaison, so it encompasses a lot here. And I think that's important to recognize. Participating in our peak committee, our subcommittee, is critical because that's just getting off the ground. And I think that individual will have some wonderful insights. So I see this as, piloting. I would love to see it get off the ground in the next phase of this year. Now, whether that is a, part-time, getting it off the ground, I really have to look at that and how we're going to post this eventually, or whether or not there's an internal. I think, Mr. Cruson, you mentioned that last meeting, could this be an extension, a role that someone takes on? And certainly we haven't, closed the door on that idea either. Either way, I think this person would be someone who really does have to develop a strong connection to the community and families, the school community, the students, the families, and most importantly, working in tandem with our administrative team. Because a lot of these cases that do arise, if you listen to the conversations that we had with families and students, it isn't that they didn't have a trusted adult to go to. It was that they just didn't feel perhaps that they were completely heard, completely understood, or that there really was a resolution that was satisfactory. So there's a lot here, and it's great to put some things on paper, but you really have to see it in action and develop it in that way from the grassroots. So I'm excited about this position because I think it's needed. I think it's always nice to have someone who's sort of a non-biased person to help mediate situations and help be a negotiator in many ways. And that's an important part of this role. And I just really wanted to share this because I know we're sort of working a little bit differently here with it being in a policy. So I wanted you to have some more information. And I did really look across a lot of similar kinds of roles from public schools to even universities in this compliance. A lot of them are called either officers, coordinators, liaisons, but many of the same facets of their role were consistent. And I think that's evident here. And Mrs. Zukowski, you brought up what I thought was a great piece of feedback, really looking at that role of this individual with policy and procedure and being helpful in developing a lot of those. So I think that's important, and I would add that in.
So is this is informational for our discussion on the policy that is next on the agenda. But so are there any board member questions or comments?
Can I just add one more piece?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, when we think of Title IX, that's part of Mrs. Uberti's role or the assistant superintendent's role. So we do have positions in the district now. I mentioned the family care navigator. I've mentioned other positions we've had in working with our highly impacted families. We do have positions like this, working with identified groups and populations in the district. So I see this role very similarly in that way.
Okay. And then I may have, in terms of timing on this, is this sort of when, I mean, we have something in place because we have a policy that we're about to pass. So it could be filled at any time that the board approves funding for such position, or how does that work?
So, well, we want to go through, we want to first have the policy passed, correct? And since that's part of the policy, then I will take the next step in. I would like to share what I have here with the peak subgroup so they have some information around that as well, and then start to determine what we want this to be. Do we want to put it out internally and externally? Do we want it to be full-time the second half of the year? Do we want to pilot it in a way that is maybe not a full-time but part-time? I want to have some time to kind of flesh that out.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions before we move on to the policy? Mr. D'Elia?
Is this an administrative position or?
No.
It's not an administrative position.
No, I said earlier, not an administrative position, and this individual would not necessarily have any supervisory role at all. So it really is someone who is working closely as a liaison with families and students and our staff.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure I understood. Thank you, Dr. Rodriguez.
Okay. Any other questions? Comments? All right. So I think that we can move on to our second read and possible action on the policy, and we'll look for a motion on that.
I move that the Board of Education approve policy 5145.42, racial harassment of students.
Second.
Okay. So Mr. D'Elia makes the motion, Mr. Cruson seconds the motion. And then do we have any comments or questions, discussion?
Did you want me to go through what was changed?
Yeah, so these were changes that happened between our last meeting and this meeting?
Yes, there were changes that the committee made in regards to the comments that we received after the last meeting, after the first read.
Yeah, if you could go through those, that would be helpful.
So I think they appear to all be in purple on this. All of those are the new changes that we made after during our last policy meeting. Just going from the top, I'll try to be semi-brief because a lot of these are small changes. The first one we changed different to unwelcomed in the paragraph right before the first numbered list. Underneath that, in number one, we actually changed that wording. The new wording more, it is more clear that we're talking about anything that has a negative impact. I know that was something that came up during our first read. The fact that it could have been taken as either a negative or a positive impact. So that was adjusted to explicitly say any conduct that has a negative impact and better define that way. In the paragraph underneath the numbered list, which I think is it's the, I guess, third paragraph, we changed at once to promptly. And we also changed in the absence of a complaint of a victim's complaint, the board or any district staff member could, upon learning of or having reason to suspect an occurrence of any racial harassment, will ensure that an investigation is commences. And that was because we agreed that it was important that as wide a range of people as possible could instigate that or start that process. Let's see. We redid some of the wording. I think we redid some of the wording at the bottom of the first page, along with the yearly staff and student development efforts. So it reads now, through yearly staff and student development efforts, members of the school community will review district protocols in identifying and reporting instances of bullying and harassment, as well as the disciplinary measures when such behaviors occur. And I think the rest of this. Oh, and the other thing we changed is under the reporting incidents of bullying, harassment, and racism. We had a rather lengthy discussion around how such a summary could be provided. Such a summary of incidents could be provided because there were concerns around confidentiality and confidentiality of those involved and what the board can and can't know in case something escalates. So we loosened that up a bit. So it's a summary of all incidents and their dates of resolution shall be included in the annual report. And we referenced back to policy 0523, which we had passed earlier, which does discuss giving us reports on the actions being taken and that kind of thing. So since it was connected, we wanted to make sure there was a connection between the two policies. And that was it for this policy as far as new changes.
Okay, thank you. So are there any comments or questions? I know this, yes, Mr. D'Elia.
Yeah, Mike, it's just a comment or a question, and maybe Debbie Lideline can answer this because she's so experienced at this. Are we creating a position through policy, and is that the right way to do this? That's, you know what I mean? Are we creating a position through policy, and is that how it should be done? Is that the right? Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, it is unusual. I don't know that I can think of a previous time where this has happened.
Title.
So it does.
It's title.
Yeah,
I think
Mr.
it's Title
Cookham?
9 calls out a position. It's not a position. It calls out a title, a job title that, as I mentioned at the last meeting, that one happens to be assigned to different people. I think right now it's assigned to the assistant superintendent, but the superintendent can define. She's the one who assigns who falls under that title and is in charge of Title 9 and Title 11, I believe, both.
So, can I elaborate on my thinking? Just my concern, and maybe Dan, sounds like you know more about this. What if this role doesn't get filled and we have a policy written around a role that's not? Should it be a more generic leadership term? I'm not looking to actually rewrite the policy, but I'm just making sure we're doing this properly. That because if, say, this role isn't created due to budget or whatever, then we have a policy written around it. That's my thing.
Yeah, I mean, my thinking, and this is the way it's been throughout all the discussions, is that this isn't necessarily a position. I mean, the ideal would be that it would become a position in the future, but the policy does not call it a position. It gives a title that So you could say your diversity compliance coordinator is the director of teaching and learning.
Okay.
And you still have a district diversity compliance coordinator. It just happens to be that person happens to have another role in the district. That's my reading of it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ms. Ledline, did you have something to add to that?
Well, I would also like to hear Lori's comments on what Dan just said, Dan Cruson, but I do agree with Dan Cruson that the diversity compliance coordinator is a title. It's not a person. So it's not as if, you know, we have to fill this position. I would be interested to find out how this person would be categorized. If there's been any discussion as to that yet.
There hasn't, because we all also, depending on whether we decide, hey, this can be a responsibility and role starting small, that just like Mrs. Uberti has a role on top of her own job, that this would be similar to that. If we did expand it and say, you know what, this is bigger than that, we need to look externally, then we would go through all the right channels as we do normally when we have a brand new position that has to be posted, and there is a cost to it. So I think right now we're just trying to get this to be a role, a responsibility, whether we, you know, obviously that's what I meant when I said I want to look at this internally first rather than thinking of it as a brand new position. And again, it will not be an administrative role, I can tell you that. But for example, in some cases, we have used outside funding to help us with a role. That's what we've done with some of the family care navigator and those who work with the most highly impacted families. Those were grant funded. So again, this is new. We just want this in the policy so that we can begin to think more deeply about how we're going to move this forward.
Ms. Ledline, did you have another follow-up?
Yeah, just a thought, and I don't even know if this is something that has been explored. Is this at all something where the town would go in with us on and talk about having like a shared service or having it, I don't know if that.
I don't know. You know, it's a good thought. I did have a moment when I thought of that. I just don't know if there's a need right now for that. Although it is, given a lot of things that have occurred in at both the board level and across town, I think that might be something that we can look at. I don't know, maybe somewhere down the future. I think they'd need to know more as we explore it. But it's a good thought, Deb, because there are, you know, look, we've had multiple incidents, both at, you know, from our end and the town when it comes just to racially driven incidents. So, you know, it is a thought. It really is. A good one.
And Mr. D'Elia, did you have something you wanted to add?
No, that's what I've been thinking about. And I've been actually worrying about it because I don't want to do something that we're going to regret doing in such an important policy. So thank you for everybody's comments.
I do think that, you know, by passing a policy with this in it, there is a level of commitment from the board to this position. It's not, you know, it shouldn't be taken lightly that it's just words in a policy. It's something that we're committing to. It's not something that couldn't be changed or, you know, I think as Dr. Rodriguez is saying, there are many ways that this could be, and even Ms. Leidline is suggesting, you know, it could be a shared service. There are many ways that it could be funded, it could be filled. So I think, you know, as a board, we have that ability to have that discussion in the future as well. But there is a certain level of commitment, I think, by putting it in this policy. Yeah, Mr. D'Elia.
That's what I was just talking about. Are we creating a position or a role? And I was understood that we just discussed this as we're making sure that this role is established, and then Dr. Rodriguez is going to figure out the best avenue to fulfill the requirements of this role and best serve our community. That's my understanding.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of summarizing it.
Thank you.
All right. Are there any other questions or comments on this policy? Ms. Zukowski?
Before I start, I just do want to say that I listened in on the policy committee meeting, and I was very pleased with just the care that the three there took in reviewing my questions and addressing the points I was trying to make. There was one case where I unfortunately had a bad choice of language that caused a little bit of confusion. And I'd like to offer a second attempt at language which might not be quite as confusing. And I think I'll offer the motion first, and then I'll give the reason behind the request for language. So how do you want to do this, Michelle?
So do you want to, so I have what your amendment is. Do you want me to put it up on the screen while you read it? Is that helpful?
That may be more useful for the, for the rest of them.
Okay, let me see if I can. Is that, do you see it?
Mm-hmm. Very good. Okay, so I motion we change the language on page A, item 2, from quote, when the educational environment is not kept free from discrimination because the harassing conduct is so severe, pervasive, or persistent that it interferes with or limits the ability of a student to participate in or benefit from the services, activities, or privileges provided, end quote. To quote, when incidents of a discriminatory nature occur within an educational environment that are so severe, pervasive, or persistent that they interfere with or limit the ability of a student to participate in or benefit from the services, activities, or privileges provided. So,
all right, so I'm going to leave that up there, but I can't see everybody on my screen when I do that. So
I request a second for discussion.
yes. So motion. Second. And Mr. Cruson seconds the motion. Thank you. I got wrapped up in reading the motion.
So basically, what this policy sets forth in item 1 is a fairly nice definition of what harassment is. And my understanding of item 2 is that what it's really trying to capture is the concept that corporate America calls a hostile workplace. But a hostile workplace as it is compares to the educational environment. Now, a hostile workplace, you can have, direct harassment as defined in 1, that would be the creator of a hostile workplace. But there are also other non-specific harassment types of actions that are really more just of a discriminatory case. Like you can have people in offices with, say, racist posters on their walls. Or you can have people who would share a racist joke that you just happen to overhear as you walk down the aisle. Those things are not technically harassment, but they are a part of a hostile environment. And so I wanted to have the language to be able to be broad enough to actually include those types of incidents as well as direct harassment.
Okay, Are there any comments or questions? Further discussion? Yes, Mr. Cruson?
I've read it through a few times. I'm not sure I see where the difference occur. I don't see where the second one actually changes what the first one says. I'm struggling. I mean, I can see that the words are different. I am having trouble identifying how the ideas are different, that each conveys.
Yes, Ms. Zukowski?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you see in the first one, it says the environment is not kept free of from discrimination because the harassing conduct is so severe. What that is doing is saying that the conduct that is severe is harassment. Okay, it's not discriminatory content. It's not that you have racist posters on the wall in somebody's office. It's harassing is really where if you look at item 1, it's where a student is exposed. I don't have the policy in front of me, but it's really where a student has unwelcome conduct towards them that is has a negative impact on them. So when you use harassing conduct in part 2, you're really limiting it to the definition of harassment that was defined in part 1.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Lideline?
Yeah, the policy that we're looking at is something, and Dr. Rodriguez, perhaps you could help me with this. This is a policy that could potentially have legal implications or be used in a legal proceeding. If it came to that, would that be accurate to say? I would assume any Board of Education policy could be.
Yes.
Would it make sense just to double check to get CABE to look at CABE's legal representation? I would just feel more comfortable if, since we're looking at changing the wording of this policy, and I assume the original policy came from CABE or was looked at by CABE initially, I would just feel more comfortable before we vote on a wording change, that we do have somebody just double check it just to make sure we're not putting something in there that can be sort of a catch-22. That would be my only concern, and something that I would request before we vote on it.
And if Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, but this particular one did come from CABE. I believe that's the one we chose and made changes to. Mostly everything we do comes from and has been checked through CABE or Shipman. At times we've gone to Shipman to get their perspective as well. And I know I only have what we have in front of us. I don't remember if this was Shipman or CABE. I'll go back and look. But normally we don't put anything forward unless it's been looked at. But Dan, do you agree we can do that? Or what do you think?
I mean, it can be done. I'm not saying it can't be. I'm trying to see. I believe you are correct that the original did come from CABE. In this case, I was trying to pull it up quickly, and quickly isn't happening.
I think, are you referring, Deb, that you just want, because we've made changes, to look at it again?
Yeah,
correct?
Particularly since at the last minute we're getting a wording change with regard to this. It just always makes me feel more comfortable. I don't know about everybody else, but just to have them do a look through, just so that we make sure that everything is appropriately done and we're not putting in wording that can cause an issue going forward if there was to be any sort of a challenge or any legal proceeding with regard to this policy.
Right.
I mean, I'm I think the biggest part of my reluctance is this is an important policy, but I also don't want to see us continually punting it over this and that. Just pushing it from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting.
Yeah,
Because
I guess I just wouldn't want to necessarily support a last minute wording change if it hasn't been looked at by legal counsel.
Well, and as we look at the change that was offered, and I don't know, Mrs. Zukowski, if we took the word, simply remove the word harassing, that seemed to be the one, which by the way, I do agree with, because you're limiting, perhaps, you can read it, that it's not just keeping the environment free from discrimination, and then we use the word harassing. So that sort of narrows it a bit. What if we just took the word harassing out, made that one change? You get the same out of that change, correct?
Right. Deborah
Ms.
Zakowski.
Zukowski?
Yeah.
The issue is the question of conduct also. I mean, is having a poster hanging on your wall conduct? I actually think that Debbie Leidline's suggestion of having it reviewed by lawyers is a good one. My preference would be having it reviewed by a third party, so rather than CABE. So I would think that Shipman is a review from Shipman would be very, very good. But this is, this is, I think, a really important thing, and we do want to get it. We do want to get it right. And we want to make sure that that we cover what we want. And what I read is we want to cover harassing conduct, and we want to cover what I call a hostile workplace, and what the Department of Labor calls a hostile workplace. So having it reviewed, I think would be, I would be completely on board with that.
Mr. Cruson?
I do think it comes down to, I think we may have to resolve the motion on the floor first, because it would be silly to delay this whole thing and have it reviewed by Shipman if the board doesn't agree that this wording is worth putting in. So to have it reviewed and then come back and have the board say, well, we don't want this wording anyway, we just wasted 2 weeks. So I agree that I do agree that if the board would like this wording in there, it should be reviewed by counsel of some sort. I'd be on board with having Shipman check it over as well. But I think maybe we should find out whether the board is in favor of this wording and then do the review if they are.
Deborah Zakowski?
Yeah. Just I'd like to add my 2 cents to this conversation. I had the same question Mr. Cruson had about whether this really changes the meaning of the policy. And I guess having legal input onto whether it actually does change the meaning and whether it's a useful change in meaning, I guess would be good to have, given that there's so much discussion about this. So, but to your point, Mr. Cruson, in the process, so you're suggesting taking the amendment off take it back and then pass the policy as it is to see if the board approves the policy?
No, not necessarily. I was saying that it's silly to have, originally what I was thinking was it was silly to have legal review this wording change and come back and say, yeah, it looks great. And then for the board to say, well, we don't want it anyway. And then we could have passed the policy tonight, but instead we pushed it off 2 weeks when we didn't actually make a change. So I was suggesting that, originally I was suggesting that the board weigh in on whether we think this wording would be appropriate in the policy. And then if the board agrees that this is a wording change we would like, have legal review it and then bring the whole policy back with the new wording in it for approval. But you do make good. I mean, there is that. What you brought up as a viewpoint is valid as well, because should we spend time discussing a change that legal is going to turn around and say it's not valid?
Well,
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
no, that's okay. But I just want to bring everyone back to, if you look at what's crossed out from the very beginning, what it began as from Cabe, and I believe it was Cabe, not Chipman. There's a reason that attorneys put in the wording they do. We have significantly changed that, and that's great. We do that a lot in our policy meetings, but keep in mind, the more we change, the more we add, we move away from the intention there. And so I do agree with Mrs. Lideline, certainly passing it by again, because we've added a lot since that one line that keeps changing. And this policy was on racial harassment of students.
So awesome. Oh my God. This is the perfect height. Look.
So I just wanted to make that point.
Michelle?
Can I stop
Michelle?
sharing my screen so I can see everybody on the screen? Okay. And then, yes, Mr. Voros?
I think it's important, and maybe Dan can weigh in on this if he can speak for Rebecca, but I would like to hear what Rebecca has to say about this, and she's not at the meeting, which I understand. So I think it's important that she be involved in this. So, Dan, can you speak for her?
I would never speak for another board member. And this is not wording this was not wording we had at our last meeting.
Right.
So it's not a case where we've been brought something that the committee had already reviewed. So she has not seen this specific wording.
Okay, so then I think it's crucial that she sees it and that she weighs in on it. Simple as that. It's only fair to her.
Well,
the rest of there still is an amendment on the table, though, is there not? Don't we have to go through that first before anything else?
Well, we could postpone all of this discussion until the next meeting, and we could make a motion to postpone the discussion on the amendment, make a motion to postpone discussion on the entire policy until the next meeting when we can get feedback. I guess I'm inclined to be okay with the policy as it was proposed, but without the amendment. But what are you suggesting, Dr. Rodriguez? What do you want?
Well, I think it's along the lines of Mr. Cruz on that. I think we have to deal with the suggested wording. Does the board want us to go that route? Because I want to make sure whatever we do, we're sharing the right wording, not only with Rebecca, but with Chipman in the end. Because this is how we get.
Why can't you share the original, what you're bringing forward to the board tonight from the policy subcommittee, and then bring the amendment wording and ask legal counsel if there's any implications of either one, is either one better, worse? What is their opinion on all of it? Can we not do that? I mean, they aren't constrained by Robert's rules. They can give us.
They could,
yeah,
but
I just think they're so similar there. That's all. But I can do whatever you want.
I think my concern is that we're going to go through all those hoops. Well, I shouldn't call them hoops. We're going to go through all that work to have them review it, and then the board's going to say, no, we liked it the way it was, and we don't want the new wording anyway. That's my concern. And then we're 2 weeks later and we're back where we started when we could have approved it anyway. That's why I was hoping that's why my suggestion was maybe we should see how the board feels about the wording, whether they want to consider it and get the information because they might want to use that wording, depending what legal counsel says.
I see what you're saying. Okay, Ms. Leidline?
Yeah, my suggestion would be, along with what Mr. Cruson is saying, let's vote on the motion to amend the policy, and then we can vote on the policy from there.
Okay. It's a plan. All right. So if there's no further discussion on the amendment, we'll take a vote on that. Should I throw the wording back up again so you know exactly what it is you're voting on?
Yes, please.
All right. So this is the proposed amendment to the policy. And I will ask everybody to vote on this. So all those in favor of the alternative wording in the amendment as proposed, say aye. Raise your hand. I have to scroll through and see who's voting on this. I'm sorry, I'm raising my hand, but I'm not. So, Ms. Zukowski, is anybody else voting aye that I'm not? I see Ms. Zukowski. All right, and all those against, raise your hand. So 1, 2, Ms. Leidline, Mr. D'Elia, and Mr. Voros?
Against.
Okay, so that's 5 against with Ms. Zukowski voting in favor. So that does bring us back to the main motion, which is approving the policy. Are there any other changes or amendments offered for the policy before we vote? I think we're, okay, so all those in favor of the policy as proposed? Aye. And any opposed? Mr. Voros?
Aye.
You're in favor? Okay, so that's unanimous in favor of approving the policy. So there, we're done with that. And that brings us to our new business, discussion and possible action on staffing needs adjustments. And I think we should put a motion on the table for this discussion.
Move that the Board of Education approve the staffing needs adjustments as presented.
Second.
All right, so Mr. D'Elia makes the motion, Mr. Cruson seconds it, and Dr. Rodriguez, I think you shared some information with us about this, and would you like to?
I shared it in, it was shared, I believe, in your board mailing, and I sent an outline for 2 positions for the duration of the school year, both that I feel are necessary. I want to be clear that while one of the 2 positions relates to COVID and what we're seeing in the way of learning issues with our students, in this case, namely special education students. The other position, which is the 0.6 tech position, was truthfully needed all along, but I think the need was reinforced when COVID really drained the work of a small tech department. They, were engaged in providing devices and installing apps and troubleshooting amidst all of the other critical roles that they do serve across the district and in the business and central office areas as well. We would like to, if these are approved, the digital application support specialist. And again, this particular, you hopefully went through it, but we feel this is and again, it's only a 0.6 position at 48,000. We feel this will very much help the technology department get to all the work that they're not getting to. And I will tell you that I've had to pay a lot more overtime than we've paid in the past, just to get the tasks accomplished. And so that's one piece of this. The other is the 1.0 special education flex support teacher. And I will tell you that there was such a position when I was at the high school. And then there was the sped teacher who was in that flex program. We do have a flex program for regular ed, and we used to have one for special education. And the needs just sort of waned for a time period. But now I think, the pandemic has really triggered some more significant changes in our students. And of course, we expected that. Many of the students did not fare well under the remote learning. These are students who really need support. And I know we've talked about this at multiple meetings. And so we've seen increases in anxiety, a loss of executive functioning skills, organization, but mostly work completion and task completion. And that certainly impacts their achievement levels. So we feel the reinstatement of this position as a full-time position won't just be needed this year, but most likely moving forward. So that is the position I find most related to COVID, where the other was really needed probably anyway, but it was really fast-tracked and it really rose to the surface that we needed more help in the tech department, given our full reliance now on technology and digital learning. So there is another one thing I wanted to mention. That's not listed here. I did add hours to a reading specialist at Hawley. It was also needed. Again, we're starting to see the need for support personnel. Though again, those same students we're starting to see gaps. I said earlier, I said this in the summer and earlier in the year, we really needed to wait. We wanted to make sure that we're not just putting people in place. We wanted to make sure we have the right assessments in how our students are doing and where the gaps are and what needs we had. And the reading specialist was just adding hours to that position, so it isn't anything new and anything I had to bring forward in that regard, which is why it isn't here. But all of this, we definitely have the funding for. There have been many, both certified and non-certified, that we have not been able to hire or hire when we thought we could hire those people, those individuals. So, we are seeing more of a surplus in that area. So again, I just wanted to point that out. And I know Tanya's on the line, and I'm sure she can confirm that. When it comes to moving these forward next year, I think both would still be necessary for sure. And in the future, I don't take these lightly. I think these are not 1 year or half year positions. I definitely would see this being an impact on the budget as well moving forward.
Okay, do we have any questions or comments? Yeah, Mr. D'Elia?
Michelle?
Is that Tanya?
Yeah.
And given,
Hear me now?
there we go.
Sorry, I have a bad echo.
Yeah, that's all right. I mean, unless you had a question, I think we're good, Tanya.
Okay.
All right. So Mr. D'Elia, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just think these should be put into that. I would recommend, or I think these should be put into that additional expenses due to COVID pile. And
Well, there are some constraints to that. So I think you're referring to the CRF, the COVID relief funds, but there are contingencies there, and it because these are newer positions that haven't been established. I think the other goes up to somewhere around December. There is possibly more money coming, but with personnel that's already been submitted. And so we couldn't add these in there.
But we might
be able to at some point in the future. I'm just talking about right now. Kristen Larson has put that forward. There are deadlines there.
Yeah, but also we have the non-lapsing we're talking about and whatnot. And I just want to make sure these are definitely COVID related expenses and they're going to last for a while. And
I think when, well, just to point out, and I believe I'm accurate here, and I believe Tanya spoke to the town as well, when the 400,000 was moved over into the capital non-recurring. I don't know if this is a fact, and I will certainly check it with Dan Rosenthal, but I believe, and it might have come from the Legislative Council, that we would not be using it for personnel. And, that's a shame because personnel is directly related to the needs we have. It's not all about masks and PPE, I will tell you, or technology. It goes beyond that, and personnel is critical. But I do believe we cannot touch the money for personnel.
Yeah, can I just add
correct.
to that? That is correct. Yes. Those funds were earmarked for PPE only. The CRF grant does go through the end of December, and we've actually reallocated much of that grant towards employee costs. So that's going to offset, and that'll be coming through soon. But, like Dr. Rodriguez said, we have had a lot of turnover. We've had positions that we haven't filled. So I do believe we have the funding in this year's budget for those positions.
I think to Mr. Delia's point, regardless of where the funding comes from, just keeping track of this being a COVID-related expense would probably be good to do, I think.
Yeah, we are tracking everything.
We're tracking all of that.
Anything related to COVID is being reported and documented.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Ms. Zukowski, did you have a question or comment?
So if something's related to COVID, then it is basically going to be temporary, where temporary could be another year, could be another year and a half, but it's not necessarily going to be here in 5 years once we get to herd immunity. So so then the question is, do we want it in our budget, or would there be alternate means? I'm speaking specifically of the SPED flex teacher right now, because that sounds like it's completely tied to COVID, in that there are certain gaps with reaching students through technology. Though I do have a question about that. So we have some money in our non-lapsing account, correct? We have a couple $100,000. And the question is whether that could, if you really say this is truly a temporary position that's really going to last and it's only COVID related, that we may have 2 years, that's 130,000 that we might be able to cover through the capital the non-lapsing account rather than the budget. But I have a question about flex versus sale, because I know when we did our sale program, I asked about flex versus sale, and I was told that flex was, well, my understanding of what I was told was that flex was really not about a special education, that the students didn't necessarily have IEPs or anything. But if that's, so I'm a little confused in terms, maybe I didn't understand the flex program properly as it relates to the sale program, or maybe what you're saying is that there are emotional that are cropping up So they're not really special ed, but you need someone's special education skills to be able to address them.
So I can answer your questions, hopefully. The first is, while this is COVID related, now we're seeing the students that we have in front of us directly related to the gaps. I think it's going to go on. I don't think there's going to be a 1 year. We believe that this is going to continue. And when you're looking at personnel and student needs, it's not as simple as, well, you know, COVID ended, so we have no more gaps in student learning. It just doesn't happen that way. I do also feel that given the number of special ed students, I think this probably was a position that without the resignation of that particular sped teacher, however many years ago, the case managers took a lot of this on, which made it very difficult for them and challenging to try to meet the IEP objectives and support the students in other ways, in executive functioning skills and organization, in work completion, because IEP objectives are very specific in many ways that don't necessarily mean helping someone get through homework that's challenging in math or English or what have you. So I don't want it I don't want to make it that it is completely COVID related either. Again, we'll know once we reestablish this position, what the need will be and for how long and the duration. Going back to what you said about flex, the answer that you were given at the time was because of what I said earlier. Flex was, it used to be regular ed, and then there was a special ed flex at the high school. As I said, when the special ed teacher moved on, they kind of took that role and the students they had, and it was, taken on by other special ed staff. Now with the co-teaching, that becomes a little bit more difficult. So the reestablishment is really going to help a lot more special ed students in ways that I think are going to be helpful. And that's why you got the answer you did, because there really wasn't a sped flex at the time the question was raised. That's what we're trying to do, is resurrect this. And SAIL is an in-house, so it's very different in that those students are there learning. There are teachers, and they are teaching curriculum, which is very different. Flex is for a more support system than actually being in a classroom and taking the class in that room, and that's what happens with SAIL. So in some ways it can be self-contained more than flex. For example, the regular ed flex, which is similar at the high school, if a student needs a durational support, they've been out with an illness, or they are getting so behind that they almost need to be pulled out for a few days to be caught up. That's how flex works.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Going back to our motion we have. Yes, Ms. Zukowski?
The question of the digital application support specialist, my question there would be, I understand that there was a ramp up where you had to get everything configured and you had to pick the right software and the likes of this, specifically COVID related. I can also understand that as a result of COVID, there may be more of an emphasis from the schools, from the district, in terms of really leveraging blended learning at a more higher level. So this particular one, if we do the 0.6 this year, is the intent that it's always going to be a 0.6 position, or is this also going to be growing?
No, we really thought this through, and we believe we can get and maintain a 0.6 will help us tremendously, and I don't see that growing at least in the next year or two. I really don't. I think that is what we need. We looked at the hours and what would help us, and we believe the 0.6 will be just enough to help us and give some relief to the staff in that very small department.
And may I ask another question?
Are there any other board members who have questions? No, okay, go ahead.
So is there going to be something, say, in 2 years, say a year after we're back in normal, or a year and a half, or 2 years after we're back in normal times again, to review these two to say, now that COVID is over and now that the effects that COVID wrought are diminishing, do we still need these two positions?
We are always looking at positions, and that happens regularly through the budget process, and even when we're working with our administrative team. You know, we know when there are positions that are no longer useful or needed or purposeful or meaningful, and we either repurpose those positions because another need presents itself, or we know that that's an area for a potential cut. So we do that regularly.
All right. Any other questions or comments? All right. Was that a hand up, Ms. Ledline? No, you're ready to vote. All right. So all those in favor of the motion? Aye. Any opposed? None. So that passes unanimously. And that brings us to
Thank you all, by the way. Thank you. Oh, that makes me very happy. This is going to help the district very much so. We appreciate the support on that.
All right, so that brings us to the discussion of the education non-lapsing account governance. And this is just to open up the question, as I was indicating earlier, that the town attorney had offered an opinion on the legislative council's authority on this account. And then we had 2 board member questions from our last board meeting that we sent to our attorney. And then I added one more that occurred to me in between that time. So the 3 questions and answers were, the first question was the question of whether the statute overrides the charter and whether the statute indicates something different from the town attorney's opinion. And so our own board attorney said, as you know, I wrestled with this issue myself. The town has a board of finance, but the legislative council is clearly the budget making authority with respect to the Board of Ed. Ultimately, it is the town attorney's call to determine which body is authorized to make deposits into the non-lapsing account pursuant to section 10-248A. And he said he has no issue with the town attorney's conclusion. And it is, he says, as the town attorney said at the legislative council meeting, that the statute really does not fit neatly into the town's, or vice versa, the town's governance structure doesn't fit neatly into the statute. So that's where the confusion comes in, and that's why the town attorney is offering an opinion on this at this point. The second question was, if the legislative council is the authority on the education non-lapsing account, do we have the grounds to revisit the process that just occurred and ask the legislative council to consider our request to deposit money into the account? And when would that have to be done? And I went back and watched some of the meeting tapes, and that was a question that was brought up at a legislative council meeting. And the answer that our attorney gives is, given that the Board of Finance vote is no longer binding, yes, we would have the ability to go back and ask the Legislative Council. There is no statutory deadline for making the deposit as long as it occurs within 1 year of the end of the prior fiscal year budget. And then the third question that I came up with before submitting questions to the attorney was, is the town attorney's opinion that the education non-lapsing account, that it should go through a process similar to section 6-35 of our town charter. Does that mean that our education non-lapsing account is similar to an appropriations process, or is it the same as an appropriations process? And our attorney says, I read the legal opinion as treating the Board of Ed surplus funds as similar to a special appropriation, but not exactly the same, which is, I think, what the town attorney also shared with the legislative council, that same interpretation. So that's good to hear that everybody's on the same page there. So those are the questions and answers from our last meeting. I don't know if you had any more questions arising from those questions and answers, or if you want any more follow-up on that. I'll open up the floor now if you want to discuss. So, Ms. Zukowski? You're muted.
Okay, I have a quick question on 2 and then a slightly longer question on 3. In terms of reissuing the request, are we to do that prior to the work trying to come up with a more unified approach, or do we do that after we have a final set of policies? Would it make sense to you? Which one?
I think that's really up to the board to decide if we even want to do that. I mean, that's really the question. The first question is, does the board want to do that? And I guess I would send it to the legislative council. I don't know how long it's going to take them to come up with a policy, so I would do it right away, I guess. Would be my recommendation, but.
Okay. And now, may I go on to the second question on number 3?
Sure.
Okay, so my understanding of the legislative council is that their ability to be the appropriations authority for the town is fully defined by the charter. So if the charter provides 3 types of appropriations, one is a budget appropriation, one is an emergency appropriation, one is a special appropriation. If this is similar to a special appropriation, but not quite a special appropriation, but there is no process for it in the charter, I have a question of whether the legislative council would be able to treat it as that, or if they would have to treat it as a special appropriation up until the time that the charter actually is amended to address this particular situation. So that would be the question I would ask the town attorney. I mean, I would have them ask the town attorney, because I think that's from us being a charter-driven, a charter-governed town, and particularly when it comes to how we spend money, I think that's a question we need to have answered.
So my interpretation of what the town attorney was saying is essentially this is not a special appropriation, and that's what our board attorney is saying. It's not a special appropriation. It doesn't matter what the charter says, and there's a statute that drives the ability for the legislative council to put money into the education non-lapsing account. So that's the process. We ask the legislative council, and they have the ability to vote and say, yes, put money into the education non-lapsing account. I mean, it is contingent upon us to make the request, and then they would have to address the process. Ms. Ladline, did you have something to add to that?
I guess I'm a little confused as to how approving putting money that's already been passed in a referendum is into a non-lapsing account is an appropriation.
We asked that question in one of our CIP Deborah Zakowski. May I speak?
Yes. Yeah.
We asked that exact question at one of our CIP Finance Facilities Committee meeting when we first met with the attorney. And what he said is by the actual transfer of the money, this is after the budget has ended, so it's actually into a different year. So the appropriation for the budget has ceased. That he said it was basically by the act of depositing it into the non-lapsing account, basically deemed it an appropriation. It was deemed an appropriation. I can get the transcript to you if you wish for that particular answer. I think I have it written up somewhere, the transcript from the videotape.
So this I don't know how much this discussion is worth continuing. I think the real question is, do you want to follow up on number 2, which is, asking the Legislative Council to deposit money into the account? I'm not recommending that we do that. That's the answer that we got from the attorney. Mr. Kusan?
In regards to number 2, I actually thought about this during the previous discussion, but my one concern, I would love to, in light of the response from the attorney, bring this back to the Legislative Council and get them to act on it. My concern is that this is still, it sounds like there's still a bit of flux around who's got jurisdiction where and what that means and what they can do. And I would hate for us to make the request, as much as I'd love to make the request tomorrow, I'd hate for us to make the request for it to get lost in the shuffle or for a decision to be made based on incorrect information. And just, I feel like there's some settling that needs to happen between the Legislative Council and the Board of Finance before we can safely, for lack of a better term, resubmit our request and get it the proper consideration.
Fair enough. All right. Any other? Yeah, Mr. D'Elia?
To Dan's point, the one thing about the Board of Finance is that all their votes were split. They never really voted no. They just were a 3-3 every single time, I believe. And then they wrote a letter saying, make sure that you take care of the Board of Education. So I kind of felt, if we need the money, which I guess we can talk to Tanya about at our next CIP meeting and then bring it to the board. If we need the money, maybe we should make that request respectfully in lieu of the fact that the Board of Finance couldn't come to a decision. Oh, that's just my thoughts on it.
All right. Any other questions? I think, just hearing the discussion, I think it probably is wise to wait until those discussions begin. And there is clarity brought by the town attorney. That was the Board of Finance Chair's suggestion, was bringing back the town attorney for further discussion. So it probably is wise to wait. Mr. D'Elia?
Yeah, and we'll also have a better idea of our financial situation with COVID expenses. I think it's something that we should just consider, not take off the table, I guess, is my point.
Yeah. Okay. So the second part of this conversation that I wanted just the board to have, because if the Board of Finance is asking our subcommittee to meet with them to discuss this, I would like the full Board of Ed to give the subcommittee some idea of what it is that we would like to happen going forward. And And I guess I'll just start off by saying I would like to see the same principle that we've had in the past with the Board of Finance be followed going forward. And that is that if money is designated for a purpose going in to the account, that the Board of Ed does not need to go back to get approval for the money as it comes out if it's used for that designated purpose. And if it's not designated when it goes in, then the Board of Ed would be willing to go back and go through an approval process for removing the money. Although that is not required by statute, and I know we've had this discussion in the past, whether that, whether that's what the Board of Ed wants to do. So that's my own personal feeling. Does anybody want to add their opinion so that our Board of Finance CIP members have some direction on this? Nope. Mr. D'Elia?
I'm on the CIP, obviously, but I'm going to try to get clarity on the process. And, really, I think it's important that we understand exactly what's expected, how it works. And I think that's going to be an important part of that. Because it was a tough process. It was very difficult. Those meetings, we went to so many meetings. I felt like we really jumped through a lot of hoops, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. Mr. Cruson?
To piggyback on that, I think it's important that we are part of this, that we don't, that they don't expect to just dictate to us, this is how it's going to work. I think it needs to be a discussion. It needs to be, I'm not saying we should get to dictate to them, but they shouldn't get to dictate to us. If this needs to be an open dialogue that comes to a conclusion so that all sides feel like everything is fair. No one's trying to play games. No one's trying to pull anything sneaky. This is just, we get this settled and everyone's happy with the resolution.
Yeah. Mr. D'Elia?
Yeah, Dan, we'll bring it. I think it's critical that we bring everything back to the whole board for discussion anyways. And that way you're fully informed and you can voice your opinion.
All right. Anybody else? I guess my last request would be that we advocate for a process that is least onerous, and I think this is what you're speaking to as well, Mr. D'Elia, while providing the other boards with a reasonable level of comfort with checks and balances, because I understand, that's a fairness that we need to consider. But also already the town's attorney's ruling has made the process more time consuming from the Board of Ed perspective, and that now there's another board in the process. It was one board approval previously. Now it'll be two boards. But it has also in that respect added more checks to the process. So I just think, keeping all that in mind is important. All right. Any other added comments, thoughts? So I'm sure we'll hear back about how this is. You have been voluntold to be a part of this process, our dear Finance CIP Facilities Committee members. All right. All right, that brings us to the first read of our policy 4118.237 and all the rest of the numbers that go with that. Face masks coverings. So I'll turn this over to Mr. Cruson so he can give us the background on it.
Yeah, so this policy has all these numbers because it falls under both personnel and students. It was brought to us as an important policy due to all of the mandates that have been put in place due to COVID and everything else that's going on. We were given both a CABE version and a version from Shipman. We didn't like the Cape version. We liked the Shipman version. So this is what we are bringing forward with some minor adjustments to it. But for the most part, this is the version that Shipman provided to us as a valid way to handle this new requirement. There was, so some of the changes you can see, there was one piece of optional language they gave us that we felt wasn't, didn't really fall in line with our current procedures. And this has also been, Dr. Rodrigue did bring this to Donna at the health district. So she has looked at this and approved it. And she agreed with the optional language not being necessary. There's another piece of optional language down. It's the third paragraph in this that we did decide to keep because we felt it was important to outline specifically that school-sponsored activities were covered by this. It's not just when you're in the school itself going to class or something similar to that. And so, yeah, that's what this policy conveys. There's also a regulation attached, and we don't, again, as we've said in the past, the regulation is really the purview of administration, but it was also reviewed by the health district and is consistent with our practices. We did have one question about the distances that were listed down at the end in regards to the face masks, face covering breaks, and the distances that need to be maintained. We as a committee had a question. That one went back and was approved as the rest of it. The distances were approved by, were checked and approved by the health district as well as Shipman and Goodwin. So, and that's where we stand.
Okay. Any questions or comments from board members? We have, yes, Ms. Zukowski.
Just two quick questions. So in our document for the, for the pandemic, we make a very special, my memory tells me that we very carefully say that masks with exhalation valves are not allowed. So is it that we have a low bar, and if we want to make it more rigorous, we can make it more rigorous with documents like the document we had for the reentry plan?
Yes, we kept it open because, I mean, the research is changing on a regular basis as what is a good mask, what is a bad mask, what we should be doing, what we shouldn't be doing. So we tried to keep it generic so that it could be changed through changes in practice and regulation and the documents like the reentry plan to define specifically what masks are good and aren't, and it can be changed as needed appropriately and quickly.
And actually, Donna Colbert she's been very clear on that because there were issues more around the name is going out of my brain right now, but the Mrs. Uberti, what was that?
The
Gators. Thank you. The Gators. And there were some districts that were clearly defining what a good mask and what a not so good mask. We did not do that. And that was in consult with Donna Colbert. Even when we spoke to DPH, I was on that call. We're on the call every week. They were just really promoting face coverings in general. So we did not make any very rigid, criteria about the kinds of masks that should be worn. What we did say was more of a general, they should be thicker, they should be multi-layered. I mean, those were the kind of, that was the criteria we would give when parents would call or when staff would ask us.
All right, any other questions? I'll throw in a question. I'm reading this to mean that any spectators at sporting events, whether it be football, soccer, basketball, hockey, would be required to wear a mask. Is that what this, okay. That was my interpretation. I wanted to make sure that I was right about that. Okay.
That was why we agreed strongly that the optional language was important, because it does cover.
Yeah. Okay. Ms. Zukowski, did you have something?
Yeah, and this one would be a question in the optional paragraph. When it says, determines that face coverings are not required for athletes participating in certain athletic activities. Why is it just limited to athletes? What about like the marching band? You can't play a trumpet if you have a mask on. And I don't think marching band people are considered athletes. Is there a reason why it is just athletes?
I mean, I would read that. I would think the marching band would fall under well, no, it might not, applicable exception. But I also don't know what's going on with the marching band as far as state regulations around that. Can you comment on that, Dr. Rodrigue?
Well, first of all, we normally think of the band as a classroom. So the same typical face coverings worn in any classroom. But Mrs. Uberti, I know there were clear criteria around masks for what we're doing with the marching band. Do you recall?
So, I mean, it's complex because obviously the students can't wear a mask while they're playing an instrument. So there have actually been masks that have gone on the ends of instruments. If you watch any college sports, you can actually see they're utilizing those, but there's mixed research behind that. So really the biggest mitigation strategy that's being used with bands is space. Or being outdoors and space.
Right.
So just a question, would it make sense to put language in there that softens that and makes that a little bit more broad for, activities that are not athletics, but that cannot be done with masks on, but that, other alternatives like space would be done to keep everybody safe?
I think the reason sports are brought up is because there's differentiations among different sports. I think you have to call sports out differently. That's just my opinion, because there are different guidelines even within the state plan about wearing masks during PE, for example. It says you don't have to. So I think sports probably should be singled out. Whether you want to call other groups out, I don't know.
I think this might be a good question to send back to the attorney and see what they say in regards to A, why athletes are called out specifically, and B, how we might call out other groups like the marching band, or how we might include them in such.
Yeah, we could certainly go back and see. I'm sure they have standard. Again, there are standard criteria around masks for, as Mrs. Uberti said, the different groups. I know the athletes is a whole debatable. I mean, they've gone back and forth with the state level on that, so that's why that one is critical.
But I think that should go back to the attorneys, and we can discuss at our policy meeting next week before it comes back for a second read.
Yes.
All right, Mr. D'Elia?
You could just end that sentence out. You could just end that paragraph at not required, because the beginning of the sentence talks about activities, And then it just, I mean, that's a simple fix right there. So maybe that would be a suggestion, Dan.
Yeah, possibly. Again, this is because of the kind of like we were discussing with the policy earlier. I think this is one that I'd want a legal opinion on, just to make sure whatever change we make doesn't get us into trouble somewhere along the lines. But yeah, depending on what they say, that would be a simple way to change it if we don't have to call out athletes
And
specifically.
we want to make sure it aligns with our practice more than anything as well.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments to take back to policy? All right, I don't think so. I think we can finish up that discussion. And again, if you come up with anything between now and policy's next meeting, which is next Wednesday, you could get that to them before then, that would be great. So that brings us to our discussion and possible action on the communication subcommittee newsletter. And we'll do a motion on that.
I move that the Board of Education approve the communication subcommittee newsletter.
Second.
All right, Mr. D'Elia makes the motion, Mr. Cruson seconds the motion, and Mr. Cruson, would you like to
So I
share
sent.
the summary?
Yep. So on Monday evening, I sent out our finalized draft of the newsletter on equity and diversity that the communication subcommittee has put together. It was definitely an interesting learning experience from multiple perspectives, and there's definitely, at least I felt, there was a lot of passion from the staff that we talked to on the subject of. I did the articles on the past efforts and the where we're going from here, and there was definitely a lot of passion both on what had happened in the past and what needs to happen in the district going forward. So I am very thankful for the staff that took the time to talk to me on this. And speaking at least for myself, because I don't like to speak for other board members, it came out. I am very happy with how this newsletter came out. I think it carries a lot of good information that I'm happy we get to share with people in general. And I hope everyone agrees with me and will approve this to go out. So like with the previous newsletter, our plan is that this will go out to the parents, the parents across the district. It'll go up on the site. It'll go out to staff. We'll send it out to the other boards in town. And there are some organizations in town like the Chamber of Commerce and the Board of Realtors, if I can get a working email address for them, and the VFW that we've worked with in the past, that we send it out to, asking that they will provide it to their members. But we're always open. The committee's always open to suggestions for other groups that we should share it with. So if anyone, either if it gets approved, if anyone wants to take a copy and send it out to a group, or if they want to give me a group to add to our mailing list, we'd be happy to consider those.
All right, thank you. I agree. Before I call on other people, I want to say that it is, this is one of those newsletters that it feels like I am so happy to be able to share all this with the community, because I feel like we try to say this in responses to emails here and there, and just to have it all, not all, but like a summary of a lot of the good things that are going on in the district is nice to have in one newsletter. It's great. Ms. Zukowski, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just want to say that how impressed I am with the courageousness of the district, because this newsletter basically, it says a lot of good things, but it also says a couple of things that is sort of like, oop, we made mistakes, or things are not where we want them to be, and we own up to that. And, you know, for a district to not only be willing to do it, but actually encouraging to do it is just phenomenal. So Dr. Rodrigue, you know, I think that this reflects who you are, and I think it reflects who you are very, very positively.
Okay, any other comments or questions? No? I will add another piece to this. I know it's getting late, but I wish I had said this earlier in the meeting because people weren't so tired at that point, but I want the board to know that there are districts across the state that are using this resolution that appears in the newsletter, the resolution that we passed back in August, promoting equity and diversity. And I've heard feedback from many other boards who are using it or have adopted it and changed it in their own way, used it as a template. And I just, you know, we should be very proud of that. And I'm glad it's going into the newsletter. I wish I'd mentioned it earlier so that you could say it's serving as a template for many other districts. But I think it's important that you know that because, you know, it's a good piece of work that we all did. And Dr. Rodrigue, I appreciate all your input on that because that was a good deed we did in getting that around the state, I think. All right. Any other board members? No. Okay. So we have the motion on the table to approve the newsletter as it's presented. All those in favor? Mike?
Aye.
Any opposed? Oh, Ms. Leidline, are you in favor or opposed?
I'm sorry, I'm in favor.
And okay, so it's unanimous. We have a newsletter. Thank you so much for all the work you put into that because it's good to have that. All right, and that brings us to public participation. If there's anybody still with us on the phone who'd like to address the board at this point, I will open it up for our 3 minutes of comment, and you can unmute yourself with your *6. I see lots of phone numbers, but I don't know. One of them is mine. I'm not seeing anybody volunteering, so we'll close out public participation, and I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Nobody wants to second.